Madeline Hart never thought her Monday morning would involve a broken sink, a handsome handyman, and a rapidly approaching crisis. But here she was, standing in her penthouse's kitchen, staring at the gushing water as she frantically dialed the emergency plumber. "This is a disaster," she muttered under her breath. The universe must have been laughing at her, because on top of running one of the most powerful investment firms in the city, she also had a gala in 48 hours and no date. Her assistant had booked and canceled 3 different options, and now she was at risk of showing up alone, which wasn't an option. The gala wasn't just a social event, it was a networking battlefield where appearances mattered. A sharp knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She swung it open, revealing a man who looked too ruggedly handsome to be a plumber. "Caleb Foster," he introduced himself, adjusting the strap of his tool bag over his shoulder. His deep blue eyes flicked to hers, then to the disaster behind her. "I heard you have a situation." Madeline stepped aside, allowing him in. "That's one way to put it." Caleb crouched by the sink, sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms dusted with just enough stubble to make him look effortlessly masculine. "Lucky I was in the area," he said, twisting a valve. "Could have been worse." Madeline crossed her arms, watching him work. "I doubt it." "Trust me," he said, flashing a grin. "I've seen worse." She found herself distracted not just by how capable he looked fixing the pipes, but by the way he carried himself. Confident, steady, but not arrogant. He had an air of someone who had been through life storms and come out stronger. "So you do this full time?" she asked, trying to make conversation. "Mostly," Caleb replied, tightening a bolt. "I take whatever jobs I can. Got a little girl to take care of." Madeline's gaze softened. "You're a father." "Yeah," he said with a nod. "Lena, she's 6. Smart as a whip." Something about the way he said her name proud and warm made Madeline's chest tighten. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag and stood, all set. "Shouldn't give you trouble anymore," she exhaled, relieved. "Thank you," he nodded, packing up his tools. "Happy to help." Madeline hesitated, then an idea struck her. A completely outlandish, ridiculous idea, but she was desperate. "Caleb," she blurted. He turned back, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, I need a favor." His expression turned cautious. "What kind of favor?" she inhaled sharply. "I need a date for a gala." Caleb blinked. "You need a what?" "A date," she repeated. "It's a high-profile event, and I can't go alone." He let out a low chuckle. "I think you've got the wrong guy. I don't do tuxedos and champagne flutes." "I'll pay you," she said quickly. "Handsomely." Caleb's amusement faded. "I'm not a charity case." Madeline straightened. "That's not what I meant." He studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "I don't know, Madeline. Fancy events aren't exactly my thing." She met his gaze. "I just need someone real. Someone who won't try to impress investors or whisper deals in my ear all night." Caleb exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "And all I have to do is show up, smile, and pretend I belong." "Yes," she said. "Exactly." His lips pressed into a line. "Fine, I'll do it." A surge of relief flooded her. "Thank you." "On one condition," he added. She frowned. "What's that?" "If I'm spending a night in your world, you spend a day in mine." Madeline hesitated. "You mean you meet Lena?" "See how the other half lives." She studied him, then nodded slowly. "Deal," Caleb smirked. "Hope you don't regret it." As he left, Madeline couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a deal that would change everything. Madeline wasn't sure what unsettled her more, the fact that she had just hired a handyman to be her fake date, or the fact that Caleb Foster seemed completely unshaken by the arrangement. Most men in her world would have leaped at the opportunity to attend the gala by her side, eager to network or impress. But Caleb. He had agreed with the same ease he had fixed her sink, as if the entire situation was just another job. 2 days later, she stood in front of her full-length mirror, adjusting the diamond earrings that perfectly complemented her deep emerald gown. The fabric hugged her figure just enough to be striking but not scandalous, the slit along one side adding a touch of daring. She had chosen the dress carefully polished, powerful, and a reminder to everyone at the gala that she was in control. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, Caleb stood there, looking like an entirely different man. The tuxedo she had sent over fit him flawlessly, the crisp black suit emphasizing the broadness of his shoulders. Gone were the work boots and rolled-up sleeves. His dark hair, no longer tousled, was neatly styled, and the hint of stubble on his jaw somehow made him look even more refined. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just took her in, his deep blue eyes scanning her from head to toe as if seeing her for the first time. "You clean up well," he finally said, his voice lower than usual. Madeline arched an eyebrow. "I was about to say the same thing." He adjusted the cufflinks she had provided, looking slightly amused. "I feel like I should be holding a glass of expensive whiskey and making business deals. You just have to stand there and look convincing," she replied, grabbing her clutch. "Think you can manage that?" He offered his arm, his expression unreadable. "Guess we'll find out." The gala was held at one of the city's most exclusive venues, a grand ballroom with towering crystal chandeliers and sleek marble floors. As they entered, all eyes turned toward them. Madeline could feel the weight of the stares, the whispered speculation. She leaned in slightly, her lips close to Caleb's ear. "They're already trying to figure out who you are," he chuckled, the deep sound vibrating against her skin. "Let them wonder." A waiter approached with a tray of champagne, and Caleb took 2 glasses, handing one to her before surveying the room. His expression remained unreadable, but she could tell he was absorbing everything, measuring, assessing. He might not have been part of this world, but he wasn't intimidated by it either. Before she could say anything else, a familiar voice cut through the murmurs. "Madeline." She turned to find Daniel Whitmore, a rival CEO, standing a few feet away. He was the kind of man who never missed an opportunity to undercut her in business or in conversation. "Didn't expect to see you with company," he said smoothly, his gaze flicking to Caleb. "And who might this be?" Madeline smiled, slipping her hand into Caleb's arm. "This is Caleb Foster." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to place the name. "Foster. I don't believe we've met. What line of business are you in?" Caleb didn't miss a beat. "Construction." Daniel's expression barely shifted, but Madeline caught the flicker of condescension. "Interesting," he said. "Madeline usually surrounds herself with executives and investors." Caleb met Daniel's gaze evenly. "I build things. She invests in them." "Seems like a natural connection." Madeline pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. She hadn't expected him to handle himself so smoothly, but there he was, calm, unshaken, and perfectly composed. Daniel gave a tight-lipped smile. "Well, enjoy the evening." As soon as he walked away, Madeline exhaled. "Not bad." Caleb took a sip of champagne. "You surround yourself with people like that all the time," she sighed. "Unfortunately." Throughout the evening, Caleb performed his role flawlessly. He was attentive without being overbearing, engaging when necessary but never trying too hard. And despite never having set foot in this world before, he carried himself as though he belonged. But as the night went on, something unexpected happened. Madeline found herself forgetting that this was all a performance. The way Caleb's fingers occasionally brushed against hers, the way he studied her when he thought she wasn't looking, it didn't feel forced. It felt dangerously real. As they stepped onto the terrace for a brief escape from the crowd, she leaned against the railing, inhaling the cool night air. "Not bad for a fake date," he murmured beside her. She turned to look at him. "You didn't just survive, you thrived." He gave a small shrug. "I'm good at adapting." The way he said it made her wonder just how much he had had to adapt in his life. But before she could ask, he reached up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate, that she stilled. His fingers lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, and when his gaze met hers, there was something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. She knew she should step back. Remind herself that this was nothing more than an arrangement. But she didn't move, and neither did he. The drive back to Madeline's penthouse was steeped in an unfamiliar tension. Not the usual kind she experienced after high-stakes negotiations or power plays at events like the Gala. This was something else, something unspoken, simmering beneath the surface. She could feel it in the way Caleb sat beside her in the luxury sedan, his gaze occasionally flicking to her as if debating whether to say something. The evening had gone better than she could have hoped. Caleb had blended into her world with an ease that was both unexpected and unsettling. He hadn't just played the part, he had owned it. And that moment on the terrace, Madeline exhaled slowly, pushing the thought away as the car came to a smooth stop in front of her building. The driver opened the door, and Caleb stepped out first, holding it open for her. She hesitated for half a second before taking his hand, the warmth of his palm sending an unwelcome jolt through her system. It was late, and she should have just thanked him and sent him on his way. Instead, she found herself saying, "Do you want to come up for a drink?" Caleb studied her for a moment before nodding. "Sure." Inside, the penthouse was quiet, the city skyline stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Madeline set her clutch down on the marble counter, walking toward the bar. She poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if he wanted one. "You handled yourself well tonight," she said, handing him a glass. "Better than I expected." Caleb took a slow sip, his gaze unwavering. "You thought I'd embarrass you," she met his eyes. "I wasn't sure what to expect." He leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "And now," Madeline took a measured sip, letting the burn settle before answering. "Now I think you're harder to read than I thought." Caleb set his glass down, watching her. "You're used to people being predictable." She tilted her head slightly. "You're used to people underestimating you." His lips twitched, but he didn't confirm or deny it. Instead, he took another sip, letting the silence settle between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it carried weight like a conversation that had started long before either of them had acknowledged it. Finally, he spoke. "You held your own tonight, too." She arched an eyebrow. "I do that every night." "I know," he said, "but it's different seeing it up close. Watching you navigate that room, knowing exactly what to say, how to say it. It's impressive." Madeline wasn't sure why his words affected her the way they did. Compliments weren't new to her, but there was something about the way Caleb said it, like he actually meant it, like he saw her in a way most people didn't. She set her glass down, suddenly feeling restless. "You said I had to spend a day in your world." "When does that happen?" He studied her for a moment, then pulled his phone from his pocket, checking the time. "How early can you be up?" Madeline folded her arms. "I run an investment firm." "I'm up before the sun." Caleb's expression held something close to amusement. "Meet me at the corner of 5th and Harper at 7. She narrowed her eyes. "What's at 5th and Harper?" "You'll see." Something told her this wasn't going to be a simple breakfast meeting, but she had made a deal, and Madeline Hart never backed out of a deal. She walked him to the door, and just as he stepped out, he turned back. Tonight was interesting. She met his gaze, feeling something shift between them. "It was." He lingered for a moment before nodding. "Get some sleep, Madeline." And then he was gone, leaving her standing in the doorway, gripping the edge of the doorframe a little too tightly. The next morning, Madeline arrived at the intersection of 5th and Harper dressed in what she thought was a reasonable compromise between business casual and whatever world Caleb was about to introduce her to. A simple blouse, dark jeans, and flats, not designer heels. She spotted him before he saw her. He was dressed in worn jeans and a black t-shirt, his posture relaxed but purposeful as he loaded supplies into the back of an old pickup truck. When he turned and saw her, he let out a low chuckle. "Didn't think you'd actually show." She crossed her arms. "I keep my word." He gestured toward the truck. "Hope you don't mind getting your hands dirty." Madeline eyed the supplies. "What exactly are we doing?" Caleb shut the truck bed with a firm click. "Fixing up a community center. It's where Lena spends a lot of time after school. Needs repairs, and the city's in no hurry to do them." Madeline hadn't expected this. She had assumed maybe a day shadowing him at work, not manual labor at a community center. But she wasn't about to back down. They arrived at a modest brick building with peeling paint and a yard in dire need of maintenance. A few volunteers were already there, including a little girl who ran up to Caleb the moment they stepped out of the truck. "Daddy," Caleb crouched, catching her effortlessly. "Hey, kiddo," Madeline watched, something tightening in her chest at the pure adoration in Lena's eyes. Caleb turned toward her. "Lena, this is Madeline." Lena studied her with curious brown eyes. "You look like a princess." Madeline blinked, caught off guard. "I thank you." Lena grinned. "Are you going to help us paint?" "I guess I am," Madeline said, glancing at Caleb, who looked far too amused. The day passed in a blur of unexpected moments. Madeline, who had never held a paint roller in her life, found herself covered in flecks of blue and white. Caleb worked beside her, occasionally giving instructions, but mostly letting her figure things out. At one point, Lena dragged her over to a set of broken benches. "Daddy says these need fixing." Madeline crouched beside her. "Does he now?" Lena nodded solemnly. "He says everything can be fixed if you know how." Madeline glanced at Caleb, who was watching them from a few feet away. His expression was unreadable, but something about it made her heartbeat unsteady. By the time the sun began to set, the center looked noticeably better. Madeline was exhausted, her muscles aching in ways they never had before, but she felt lighter. Caleb handed her a bottle of water, leaning against the truck. "So, survive the day?" Madeline took a long drink before answering. "Barely." He chuckled, glancing at the freshly painted walls. "You did good, Hart." She looked at him, realizing she liked the way he said her name, and that, more than anything else, terrified her. Madeline had never been more aware of someone's presence than she was of Caleb's. As she leaned against the truck, exhaustion settling into her muscles, she could feel him beside her, not just physically, but in a way that felt deeper, more unsettling. The day had unraveled something she hadn't anticipated, stripping away the carefully constructed walls she had spent years building. She had stepped into his world expecting to observe, to endure. Instead, she had found herself immersed in it, pulled in by the easy rhythm of his life, by the warmth of his daughter's laughter, by the way Caleb moved through the world with a quiet certainty that made everything feel less chaotic. When had that happened? She turned to look at him, studying the way the last remnants of sunlight cast shadows along the sharp angles of his face. He was watching her too, his gaze steady, unreadable. "You're thinking too hard," he said. She exhaled, shaking her head. "I don't usually do this." He tilted his head slightly. "Do what?" She gestured vaguely. "This. Spend an entire day doing something that doesn't involve work, numbers, strategy." Caleb's expression softened just enough for her to notice. "Maybe you should." She blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of his words. He wasn't trying to challenge her, wasn't pushing an agenda. He was just saying it as he saw it. And the worst part, she wasn't sure he was wrong. Lena ran up to them then, her hair a wild mess from a day of playing and painting. She looked up at Madeline with wide, expectant eyes. "Are you coming back?" Madeline hesitated, feeling Caleb's gaze on her. She had spent years making decisions in seconds, closing deals worth millions without blinking. But this question from a 6-year-old, it made her hesitate. Lena was still watching her, hope written all over her face. Madeline swallowed. "Yeah. I think I will." A broad smile spread across the little girl's face before she turned and ran off again, leaving Madeline standing there with a strange tightness in her chest. Caleb didn't say anything. He just watched her, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. The drive back to the city was quieter than before, but it wasn't the kind of silence that was uncomfortable. It was the kind that hummed with things left unsaid, with the weight of something shifting between them. By the time they reached her building, the city lights had taken over the sky, casting a familiar glow against the sleek glass of her penthouse windows. She should have just said goodnight. She should have stepped out of the truck, walked inside, and let things settle. But she didn't. Instead, she turned to him, fingers tightening slightly against her lap. "Come up." Caleb's gaze flickered, something unreadable passing through it. "Madeline, no excuses," she interrupted before he could finish whatever thought was forming. "Just come up." For a moment, she thought he would refuse, that he would make some comment about how they came from different worlds, how this was blurring lines that shouldn't be blurred. But he didn't. He nodded, shifting the gear into park before stepping out. The elevator ride-up was steeped in a tension that was impossible to ignore. She could feel the heat of him beside her, the unspoken weight of everything that had transpired over the last few days pressing heavy in the small space. When the doors slid open, she led him inside, setting her bag down on the counter. Caleb took in the space, his eyes scanning the polished floors, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the carefully curated decor. He had been here before, but something about tonight made it feel different. "Still feels too perfect," he murmured, running a hand along the marble countertop. She crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. "You say that like it's a bad thing." He turned to face her, something unreadable in his expression. "No, just different." Madeline swallowed against the sudden dryness in her throat. "And different is bad." Caleb didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow step toward her, closing the space between them. Her pulse kicked up, her breath hitching slightly. "No," he said, his voice quieter now. "Not bad." She wasn't sure who moved first. 1 second, there was space between them, the next there wasn't. His hands found her waist, his touch firm, grounding. She barely had time to process the warmth of him before his lips found hers, slow, deliberate, as if he was giving her the chance to stop him. She didn't. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss. For someone who spent her life controlling everything, making calculated decisions, this was anything but. This was reckless, messy, and undeniably real. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "This is a bad idea," he murmured. Madeline let out a soft, breathy laugh. "Probably." Caleb pulled back just enough to look at her, his fingers still resting against her waist. And yet, she met his gaze, lips still tingling from the kiss. "And yet," she echoed. They both knew what this was, what it wasn't. But at that moment, none of it mattered. Because for the first time in a long time, Madeline Hart wasn't thinking about the future. She was just here, with him. Madeline hadn't realized how easy it was to let someone in until she found herself waking up to the sound of Caleb moving around her kitchen. The scent of coffee drifted through the penthouse, blending with something warm and rich, something she never would have associated with her sleek, sterile space. She pulled on a robe and padded toward the kitchen, stopping when she saw him standing at the stove, flipping what looked suspiciously like pancakes. He was barefoot, his T-shirt slightly wrinkled, his hair a mess of waves that made him look even more impossibly attractive. She leaned against the doorway, watching him. "You're cooking." He glanced over his shoulder, his expression relaxed. "I figured you don't eat much besides perfectly portioned meals delivered in airtight containers." She folded her arms, arching a brow. "And you decided to enlighten me with pancakes." Caleb slid one onto a plate, then turned to face her fully. "They're Lena's favorite. Figured I'd see if they pass your impossible standards." Madeline hesitated before stepping forward and taking the plate he offered. She cut into the pancake, taking a bite. The warmth of it melted on her tongue, the subtle hint of cinnamon surprising her. She chewed slowly, then set the fork down with a nod. "Not bad." His lips twitched slightly. "High praise coming from you." She ignored the comment and poured herself coffee, trying to ignore how domestic this felt, how unfamiliar. The gala had been a test. A momentary arrangement that should have ended the second the event was over. But then there was the community center. Lena. The way Caleb had kissed her like she was something worth holding on to. She should have been the one to pull away first. She hadn't. And now, standing here in her kitchen, eating pancakes made by a man who shouldn't fit into her world but somehow did. She realized the boundaries she had so carefully drawn were blurring. Caleb leaned against the counter, studying her. "You're thinking too hard again," she exhaled, setting the fork down. "I don't do this." His expression didn't change. "Do what?" "This," she gestured vaguely between them, "whatever this is." He took a sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim. "You mean letting someone in?" She tensed slightly. "I mean getting attached." Caleb didn't say anything at first. He simply set his mug down and took a step toward her. "You think attachment is a bad thing?" She met his gaze. "I think it's dangerous." His fingers brushed against the counter, his posture relaxed despite the weight of the conversation. "Because people leave," her throat tightened. "Because people disappoint." Caleb nodded slowly, as if he understood something she wasn't saying out loud. "I don't know what kind of people you've had in your life, Madeline," he said, his voice steady, "but I'm not them." She wanted to believe that. But belief required trust, and trust wasn't something she gave easily. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen, seeing her assistant's name flashing. Reality came rushing back. She picked it up, answering briskly. The conversation was short, direct. Her presence was needed at the office. A situation required her immediate attention. Caleb watched her as she ended the call. "Work," she nodded, already shifting back into the version of herself that knew how to handle problems, how to compartmentalize. "I have to go." He didn't stop her, didn't push. But as she grabbed her bag and walked toward the door, she hesitated. She turned back, meeting his gaze. "Are you free tonight?" His expression remained unreadable for a moment before he nodded. "Yeah," she exhaled. "Dinner." "My place." Something flickered in his eyes, something she didn't quite have the courage to name. "All right," he said simply. She nodded once, then walked out the door before she could second-guess herself. By the time evening arrived, Madeline had convinced herself that dinner was nothing more than a rational extension of their arrangement. They had spent time in his world, now she was inviting him into hers. That was all. And yet, as she set the table, carefully selecting the wine, checking the menu twice, she felt something entirely unfamiliar settle in her chest. She was nervous. She never got nervous. A knock at the door pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. She opened it to find Caleb standing there, dressed in dark jeans and a button-down that somehow made him look both effortless and devastatingly put together. He held up a brown paper bag. "Lena insisted I bring dessert." Madeline arched a brow. "Does she know where you are?" Caleb stepped inside, setting the bag on the counter. "She might have asked if I was going to see the princess again." Madeline's lips curved slightly. "I assume you corrected her," he shrugged. "Didn't have the heart to." She shook her head, turning back toward the kitchen. "Wine, sure." She poured 2 glasses, handing him one before leading him to the dining table. The meal was quieter than she expected, but not uncomfortably so. There was a different kind of tension between them now, something neither of them seemed willing to name. By the time dessert had been cleared, she found herself leaning back in her chair, studying him. "You fit in tonight," she said. Caleb took a slow sip of wine. "You sound surprised." "I am." He set the glass down, watching her. "You keep trying to put me in a box, Madeline. First, you thought I wouldn't belong at the gala. Then you assumed I wouldn't understand your world. Now you're surprised I fit into this moment." She tensed slightly. "That's not what I meant." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Then what did you mean?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again, because she didn't have an answer. Or rather, she didn't have an answer she was ready to admit. Caleb exhaled, pushing his chair back. "I should go." Panic flickered through her, too fast for her to conceal. She didn't want him to go, she wanted him to stay, and that terrified her more than anything else. But before she could say anything, he was standing, grabbing his jacket. "I had a good time," he said, his voice softer now. "More than I should have." Madeline's pulse pounded in her ears. "Caleb," he looked at her, waiting. She could stop him. She could ask him to stay, but then what? She wasn't ready for what came after, so she did what she had always done. She let him go. And as the door closed behind him, she realized with a sinking certainty that for the first time in her life, she might have just made the wrong choice. Madeline told herself she had done the right thing. Letting Caleb walk out of her penthouse, out of her carefully structured life, was the logical choice. She wasn't built for entanglements, for vulnerability. She had spent years crafting an existence that was untouchable, impenetrable. So why did she feel like she had made a mistake? The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and business deals, each one executed with precision, with the same ruthless efficiency that had built her reputation. But beneath the surface, something was off. She found herself distracted at odd moments, thinking about him when she should have been focused, the way he had looked at her before leaving. The way he had fit so seamlessly into her world, yet never tried to change himself to do it. The way she had wanted him to stay. She hated uncertainty. And Caleb Foster had introduced an unbearable amount of it into her life. By the time Friday evening arrived, she had resigned herself to pushing past it. She had a dinner meeting with potential investors, a high-profile acquisition on the horizon. There were far more important things to focus on than a man who had no place in her world. At least that was what she told herself. But then, fate had other plans. She was stepping out of the restaurant, adjusting the coat draped over her shoulders when she caught sight of him across the street. He wasn't alone. Lena was tugging at his hand, pointing at something in a bakery window, her excitement visible even from a distance. Caleb was crouching beside her, his attention fully on her, nodding at whatever she was saying. Madeline should have walked away. Instead, she found herself standing there watching. A warmth spread through her chest, something dangerous, something she couldn't afford to feel. Lena turned suddenly, her gaze landing on Madeline. For a moment, the little girl blinked, as if unsure whether she was seeing correctly. Then, her face lit up. She tugged at Caleb's sleeve, pointing. He turned, and the second his eyes met Madeline's, everything else faded. There was no escaping now. He hesitated, then murmured something to Lena before straightening and crossing the street with her beside him. Madeline steeled herself, forcing her expression into one of polite indifference. "You're everywhere," Caleb said as he reached her, his voice carefully neutral. She lifted a shoulder. "I could say the same about you." Lena grinned up at her. "Hi, princess." Madeline's lips parted slightly before she managed to smile. "Hello, Lena." The little girl bounced on her heels. "Daddy got me a cupcake." "Do you like cupcakes?" Madeline hesitated. "I don't usually eat them," Lena gasped, horrified. "How do you live?" Caleb huffed out something close to a laugh, shaking his head. Madeline found herself smiling despite herself. "I manage." Lena studied her seriously. "You should have won." "Cupcakes make everything better." There was something disarming about her, something so pure and unaffected. It unsettled Madeline in a way she hadn't expected. Caleb exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "We were just heading home." Lena looked between them, then tugged at Caleb's sleeve. "Can she come with us?" Madeline sucked in a breath. Caleb hesitated. This was the moment, the crossroads. He could make an excuse, she could decline, or they could stop pretending. Caleb's gaze locked onto hers. "What do you say, heart?" She wasn't sure who was more surprised when she answered. "All right." The drive was quiet but not uncomfortable. Lena filled the silence with excited chatter, detailing the events of her day, the cupcake flavors she had debated between, the book she had just finished. Madeline listened, fascinated by how effortlessly Caleb engaged with her, how easily he made her feel heard. She had spent her life surrounded by powerful men, men who commanded boardrooms and dictated markets. But none of them had ever held the kind of quiet strength Caleb did. It wasn't about dominance. It was about presence. When they arrived at Caleb's place, Madeline took in the warmth of it. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it felt lived in, real. Lena ran ahead, setting her cupcake on the counter before disappearing into her room. That left only them. Caleb leaned against the kitchen island, arms crossed. Didn't expect you to say yes. Madeline met his gaze. Neither did I. He studied her, something unreadable in his expression. Why did you? She could have given a dozen different answers. But only one was true. Because I didn't want to walk away. Something shifted in his eyes. Slowly, he pushed off the counter, closing the space between them. You're terrified of this, aren't you? He murmured, her breath caught. Terrified of what? He reached up, tracing a finger along the edge of her jaw. Of something real. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't, because he was right. She had spent years keeping people at arm's length, ensuring no one ever got close enough to hurt her. And yet, Caleb had gotten in anyway. She swallowed hard. I don't know how to do this. His fingers curled gently around her wrist, grounding her. Then let's figure it out together, she exhaled shakily. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like running. Instead, she leaned in. And when he kissed her, slow and certain, she knew. She wasn't going anywhere. Months later, as she stood in the newly renovated community center, watching Lena cut the ribbon with exaggerated excitement, Madeline realized how much had changed. She had fought against them, but Caleb had never pushed, never demanded. He had simply been there, steady and certain, until she was ready. And now, as he wrapped an arm around her waist, pressing a kiss to her temple, she knew she had made the right choice. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't just building an empire. She was building a life, with him, and she wouldn't trade it for anything.